Hello, today I'm going to introduce the phenomenon of alpha widows. The term alpha widow originally came from the Pua community. He described a certain phenomenon that concentrations in men, especially in marriage. The point was that, with the rise of their relationships and marriages, when the hormonal shift fell and a normal and common routine entered into everyday life, the spouses began to mention from now on some former man for whom they often, after many years, felt a longing or even an unwavering drive. They mentioned him and compared his current husbands with him, often with the uncovered accusation that their present Bob is not as exciting as the attractive Chad known in the past, that he no longer has those emotions. Remember, there are fewer and fewer women nowadays who put rationality above emotions, not counting those who are already in advanced age. The gentleman noticed this trend and shared this information. It turns out that this is not an isolated phenomenon, but a repeatable pattern. Therefore, once again, alpha widows is not some term taken like a rabbit from a hat, and has its foundations in observations of real relationships and marriages. Women in these relationships often showed a certain repetitive pattern of thinking about these past attractive men. Namely, they felt like they had escaped them. That is, the ladies wanted to enter into a long-term relationship with them, but they did not want to. There's another visible motif in the behavior of the alpha widows. Often these ladies not only spoke with fury, but even departed from their then husbands to connect with the man they knew from their past. If the option to change branches appears, again, emotions are beyond logic. That's why you need to know. It's important to remember that, which is why I remind you. Because emotions are information from the subconscious, limbic system, or spider brain. Call it what you want, but not from the rational newest part of the cerebral cortex. Thus, the term originally discussed today was primarily used to refer to ladies in permanent relationships, mostly married, who missed an ex-man. And these thoughts about them obviously didn't give them peace. I would remind you that at the end of the 20th century, there was no such extensive internet technology, including mobile. This, as we already know today, made it not that easy for women to get attention in the form of Tinder, Instagram, and others. The world's best-selling phone in 2000 was the Nokia 3030, which didn't even have a color display. So to find extra emotions in the form of a lover, you had to leave the house and not just make yourself a selfie in the strings over the bathtub. This exit involved some inconvenience. I mean, the time that had to be devoted to being physically on the spot behind the psychotropic drugs. Such an exit always involves a change in everyday behavior, and such a change would not pay the attention of even an average attentive husband. In addition, there were not-so-popular adventure demands, friends with benefits, one-night stands, and others. There was also social ostracism, which made women respect themselves more. Today, they are even encouraged to behave solely, not even realizing what devastation it will cause in them. But this is a subject for another episode. Thus, at the turn of the centuries, in the absence of such widespread female promiscuity and more sloppiness, the widow after alpha meant a woman in a relationship longing for some valuable man for her from the past. Today, the term alpha widows is wider. Red Pill's understanding of the psychology of women and their behavior in the marriage market has grown. The market itself has changed too, even by allowing for a lot of loosening. This is not condemned, and at least tolerated, so a very small portion of them crawl like old linen. But they do it quietly so as not to spoil their opinion in the environment. The manosphere had 20 years to understand this issue from the functional side and the consequences for men. So today the alpine widows are a term that does not only refer to women in marriages, but potentially to any girl you're thinking of building a longer relationship with. To understand these consequences of the phenomenon, it is necessary to return to the basic mechanism of female partner selection, that is, to hypergamy. Sociology knows this concept, but it does not seem to recognize this phenomenon outside of marriage, while it is crucial to understanding the entire marriage market. Ladies are also guided by their hypergamy instincts when choosing partners, not just husbands. I don't know of a single case in which a woman who has achieved significant success and a real career has fallen in love with, for example, a homeless person with a good heart and a wonderful interior. And yet we're fed with such a fairy tale about the fact that love is the most important thing, and that's why you need to know that it's just a fairy tale for good and weak boys. If it were otherwise, such cases should happen at least once in a while. Let's say, once in 10. But somehow it's futile to look for such cases in real life. As I said, I do not know one such case, nor do I know a single person who knows such a case. So it probably doesn't happen at all, or very, very rarely. To remind you, the ideal scenario for a female reproductive strategy is the case where a woman finds an ideal man, that is, One with alpha characteristics, but at the same time family, warm, caring, faithful, who submits to her, and at the very same time does not completely lose determination, and so on. You describe this evolutionary dilemma perfectly in episode 11. You need to know that, despite the culture that currently encourages women to be lazy, most women are actually hoping to find a permanent partner, because it is cost-effective in terms of security and evolutionary survival if it is better than her. That is, one that would fulfill the hypergamic imperative. These are the rules of the game, and even scientific research does. This whole talk about equality actually shoots women themselves in the knee, because a man equal to them is usually not really attractive to them on a subconscious level. Of course, they can be connected to it by way of calculation, according to the law of Briffau, but then we have a boundary probability of certainty that such a man is not her best hypergamic choice. That is, he is not perceived as being overall better than her, and then there is no real desire. If that happens, it is possible that we are already dealing with Alpha Widow and you are inevitably rushing to meet the wall and have entered into a relationship with the man under the influence of the calculation of the time passing and the approaching wall. Now, to see a broader picture of this puzzle, let's add two puzzles in the form of attention and expectations. Before social media developed, you had to have some kind of social circle. To be plain, you had to have friends, or at least a place, or an opportunity to make acquaintances. It was an investment of time. Today, just a few photos, Instagram or a dating app, and attention flow with a wide stream. Technology is increasing the potential resource of candidates for women. Unattainable even a dozen years ago, many ladies built a misconception of their own attractiveness because it is interested in the hordes of simps. I personally know examples of women who have said in open text that from time to time they create an account on Tinder just to improve their feelings and appreciate the news they receive, that is, male attention. In this place, quite a lot of modern women are making a cardinal mistake, which will be burdensome in the consequences. They confuse the attention given to them by men in order to seek pleasure in the bedroom with that given to build an authentically long-term relationship. A little hint for the ladies who listen quietly to this channel. It's said that women can pretend to orgasm, but men can pretend to be committed. Gentlemen in their phase, as ladies like to call it when they talk about themselves, finding themselves and enjoying life, can behave the same way as they do at the peak of their attractiveness, because of the choice. Let me remind you that loyalty is not the same as the absence of options. Here's a reservation for the gentleman from Black Pill. If your peak attractiveness is small, then don't expect models to seek your attention and be in line to get into a relationship with you. It seemed obvious to me, but after some comments, I have the impression that it is worth saying. Life is brutal, and you have to measure your forces against your intentions. But when you don't get into it, you get a little social audience, you know what the rules of the game are, then the situation won't be hopeless. Although I agree, it's not easy for the average guy these days. Hypergamy causes women to look for the most valuable men. Okay, they are right. But in this way, according to the principle of supply and demand, the most valuable of its axes, the upper few percent of the population suffer for a certain yield. The rest is definitely upstairs. I presented the principle of supply and demand in the maternity market in section number 2. This disproportionate proportion is causing disruption in the entire marriage market, to which the removal of female reproductive strategies from the rope has contributed greatly. At the same time, tempering male alpha strategies, which let ladies say what they want, are statistically attractive to them. Let's go on. I think everyone knows the saying that appetite grows as you eat. It will help to understand the mechanism of alpha widows that works today. A man who has been admitted to himself by a woman, by definition, has a higher SMV than her, or at least some component that the woman is paying attention to. If it were otherwise, there would be no relationship, no bedroom. And that's where the stairs start. Every next guy a woman let go is probably better than the previous one in some way. We know that a guy's SMV is usually built up with age. So the boy from high school was a little better than that from elementary school. The guy in college was better than the guy in high school. After graduation, he was better than a student, and so on. This is still the most common symptom of hypergamy. Of course, until there's a wall, the point is that every next partner of higher value than the previous one at the subconscious level becomes a determinant of what a woman can be in the marriage context. Why bind yourself to the weaker when you can bind yourself to the better, right? There is no deeper philosophy here, the simple principle of maximizing profit from game theory. And at the same time, here is a trap that was eliminated by customs. If the interested girl is attracted by an attractive, successful guy, who, in addition, can afford to leave such a girl without a problem, then he will probably take advantage of the option of pleasure in the bedroom, because we know that the female nature to the stronger, or otherwise more attractive male will react under contempt. For guests with a choice, it will be nothing special. Oh, good fun. Some endorphins, but no more willingness on his part to enter into a long-term relationship, especially if the difference in SMV will be big. For most women, those unharmed, sex is more than just an act of coupling. First, there must be emotional commitment, often with a vision of a common future. The opposite of men. A lot of times I've met girls who claimed it was just a bedroom. It's just friendship with benefits and so on. Most deceive themselves and after a short time very strongly enter into such acquaintance and begin to have expectations about a guy who was only supposed to be a time filler, a way to kill boredom and provide emotion. The hope arises that her feelings will prevail and that he will choose her. It's a classic that ladies are reluctant to admit, but it's often what it looks like. The most attractive man becomes the new standard of what is within the reach of a woman. But because he has a choice, it's when there's an extra thing going on with a relationship with him. It is most often the subconscious regret of loss, the loss of that valuable male who didn't want to get into a relationship. He did what he wanted and went on. He achieved his goal and was unable to submit. Consider, however, is not at least a sign of independence, and therefore also a sense of strength. The bedroom for most women, especially those who are not damaged, is inextricably associated not only with emotions but also with rejection. For example, of oxytocin, the hormone of attachment. Now try to put yourself in the place of a woman for a moment so you can better understand the mechanism. Hypergamically, she didn't think she was in the top 10. She found her fairy tale prince, or at least a better man than herself. Her thoughts were already directed towards the land of eternal happiness with him. Home, happy life together. Since it was a suitable man in her opinion, it did not exclude a bunch of children. She's already seen it with her imagination. Wedding cougar. And here all of a sudden the spell, the guy didn't want her. Only unfulfilled expectations and desires remained. First of all, from a total hormonal disruption independent of her, she went down to the very bottom, because he was a guest and he's gone. This causes an unintentional emotional swing. Also think about what the departure of such a guy means to the ego that's just leached. It's total devastation. Once upon a time, social norms, including religion, protected women by limiting such a strategy to men. But not today. It is postponed because at time the cost of the carousel and many partners. One of the commentators on the channel often reminds us in his comments that today ladies confuse success with taking. And of course, he is right. Even the grandmothers of modern women knew this risk, but today's ladies don't seem to know it anymore. A rhetorical question arises. Who didn't tell them that? He didn't warn you? Why don't they know about it when their grandmothers knew about it? Back to emotion. I remember the saying that people will forget what you did, but they won't forget how they felt about you. And that's why you can imagine what an emotional sinusoid such a woman has. There are emotions, so it must have been love. Such a guy will stay in her head for a long time, if not forever, even if it wasn't his intention. At this point, you will associate the statements of women in which they often accuse their ex-partners of some kind of toxicity, being narcissists, and so on. If so, then you will also have a comparison, some point of reference to how many ladies can be such an alpha audience. For the sake of clarity, I would add that, according to a 2008 study, the percentage of narcissistic disorders in the US population was estimated at 6.2%. Narcissistic personality disorder was more common among Black people. Assuming that there is a similar trend in Poland, there are two conclusions. Either women exceptionally often feel attracted to such men, which is understandable in the light of the episode about the dark triad, or in order to feel better, they have to rationalize their bad placement of feelings, accusing the manipulation of the man. This should also not be surprising, considering the psychological mechanisms of self-protection and solipsism, because little improves well-being as avoiding responsibility for your actions. It's easier and faster to reject. I'm not saying that some of the ladies didn't actually get into narcissistic or psychopathic men. On the other hand, I argue that such rationalization is too often a convenient excuse and an explanation for their careless and irresponsible choices. An excuse that makes it easy for women to put themselves in the role of victims and thus discard responsibility. He was angry. I just loved him. That's why you need to know. When you understand the evolutionary consequences of hypergamy and this even existential fear of losing a valuable male, you will also understand the saying that women set the rules for beta males, and without a problem, they break them for alpha males. Such a man who is the fulfillment of the biological imperative of the female reproductive strategy, and who at the same time has not entered into a relationship, leaves traces in the psyche. It may become an unparalleled ideal, but at the same time, because it is inaccessible, it also becomes a desire and a certain standard, which it will be difficult to give up because after all, he is already in the garden and has already welcomed the goose. For this reason, it is spoken of a widow because she had lost a man whom her brain wanted to keep for herself in an authentically monogamous relationship with authoritative desire. Monogamous because you do not have to share with him and all his attributes and resources in order to selfishly keep them for yourself and your future offspring. You can't see that side of the relationship in romantic comedies. To sum up, Alf's widow is a sort of mental obsession with a man from the past who was a woman's hypergamy ideal. Let's go a step further. Considering that we have the 21st century and a gynocentric environment, the era of social media and internet communicators. Imagine another situation, one in which a girl is attractive and without moral breaks. She has a huge choice of abstention, and because of the hypergamy, the candidate for the relationship must be in some way better than her. But because she is better, he also has a choice and can use the tactics of counting and forgetting. He uses it because, maybe, because he is also successful, there is a demand for him, and the relationship of such a woman lasts only a dozen weeks, maybe a few months, and she's left alone, over and over again. On the one hand, her ego is briefly licked by the interest of a high-value man. On the other hand, the reluctance to join such men is devastating to her sense of value. Additionally, let's assume that this situation lasted for 10 years, from, say, the age of 20 to 30. This assumption makes another man quarterly for 10 years give the number 40 on the counter, and it's not the highest possible course you'll encounter. In her memory will remain the memory of uniqueness of each of them in some field. One was rich, the other was famous, the third was funny, the fourth was incalculable, by which he surprised her and gave her emotions. The fifth was a great lover. The sixth was affectionate, the seventh took her on great trips, and so on and so forth. Your appetite grows as you eat. There is then the possibility that in the mind of such a woman will arise the expectation that the next man will have to be better than the combination of the previous ones. This makes the expectations of such a lady are even unrealistic to satisfy by one man. It's a mission impossible, and Tom Cruise is one. In this case, you have expectations arising from a biological imperative. So try to imagine what the consequences will be for her future well-being and happiness in a stable relationship. It is usually difficult for ladies to voluntarily lower their demands on their partner, regardless of the reality of their expectations, and they are often much above what they actually contribute to the relationship. I will only point out that the prospects, gently speaking, are not pink, and without making a choice appropriate to the SMV of this lady, hypergamic memory of the ideal of the man will not give her peace, and the wall is unshakable. Later, there will be crying and scratching teeth and already clamped, complaining where these men, and loneliness with the beloved cat is not excluded. If you meet such a partner whose permanent relationships do not work, then with a boundary probability you have to deal with damaged goods, and you already need to know because it depends on your future, finances, health, including mental, and even in extreme cases, life. The light in the tunnel is the fact that not every woman will have alpha widow syndrome, but the risk is there, and nowadays it's not small. So you can't afford to ignore the feminine nature, which is currently limited by nothing but your masculinity. For example, about something other than that longing, she sings in her hit Someone Like You by Adele. As part of the exercise, try to find 3 songs in which a woman sings about regret that she left a weak guy. I assure you that this will be a very, very difficult task, if at all possible. You had this information in front of your eyes all the time, but you were told that it meant something different than it really meant. Even in the songs, regret for the loss of a valuable guy. I recommend listening to the song of Ani Dabrowskaya under the title Non-Truth. It's a classic of the genre. When you talk to the unfamiliar men who are still in the union matrix and show them the real dynamics of relationships in terms of hypergamy and alpha spectators, most often they experience a very strong cognitive dissonance and find that this is not true and these women have been hurt, exploited by men, players, patriarchy. Put anything in here. Rationalization will always be found. I just remind you that to tango you need 2, and you can't seduce a woman who doesn't want to be seduced. The secret is for a man to be more valuable than a woman, or to give her what she needs at a given moment. Then the door opens, which previously for the less valuable was tightly closed to 4 triggers. It doesn't always have to be the appearance, sometimes attention is enough. If appearance were the most important thing, Brad Pitt gets a divorce from his wife, Angelina Jolie. Brad Pitt, according to many mega-handsome men, only by his appearance was not able to embrace the subject, so I recommend once again thinking about whether the look is really the most important in any case. Yeah, that's important, but it's not the only component. At least equally important is the knowledge of the rules and the skill of the game. And as I said, the difference in SMV. Blue pill men don't think that women's behavior can be a natural way of acting and that they may want it. Once, hypergamy was limited by religion, morality, and a broad culture. But today it no longer exists, so we are often dealing with the unlimited nature in the free American. The consequences will be deplorable for the girls themselves and for society as a whole. It's approaching big steps. Moreover, attempts to draw attention to the fact that laxity is detrimental to women themselves are immediately perceived as an attack on freedom and a patriarchal attempt to restrict choice because men do the same. It's hard for them to burn in the fire of their hypergamy. The wall will effectively verify who was right and which woman will be happier. Of course, those of the girls who have survived in normal, dysfunctional, and full families have received the appropriate patterns, are smart enough, and are able to control themselves enough not to distribute their treasures to the right and left, still have a chance, because valuable men can recognize valuable women. The problem is that the mass of low-value women are pretending to be just those of value. Therefore, you need to know what to pay attention to if you are interested in a longer and more stable relationship. In conclusion, I will tell you how you can use the phenomenon discussed today to match the odds in the game. Well, firstly, those of the men who are perceived as the best that a woman can afford from the point of view of her value in the marriage market have a chance practically never to encounter the phenomenon of a widow after alpha. Because they're the best choice for her, so who's she gonna miss? Such a lady will be on the subconscious level to check the boundaries of her guy, that is, to test what she can afford and what can go to, without incurring consequences. That's why I told you to have your own rules and guard them like independence, because they're going to be tested. It's just a matter of time. If you turn out to be a strong man and do not allow your frame to change in the name of access to the bedroom, there is a good chance that the woman will be genuinely excited by contact with you in your very presence. That's how a woman's fucking brain works, reacting with excitement to a man stronger than herself. These are the rules of the game, but the masses of men are unaware of it and have misconceptions about relationships. It's hard. They'll have to prove on their own that it's not 1960, when a guy, as I mentioned before, will be a woman's best hypergamy choice until she finds someone with a higher SMV. Willing or looking for a relationship, she won't even think about looking for other guys. For what reason would he do that? A strong man does not tolerate games and could leave her, which would give rise to an evolutionary fear of loneliness. This is precisely why the dread game works, that is, in a certain degree of uncertainty about the intention of the man. It is skillfully used as a powerful tool, to which women in appropriate conditions respond perfectly. With the same strength as men are triggered by female sex appeal. If in your relationship with your wife or partner you notice signs of alpha spectators, then treat this as a barometer indication that you are not treated by a woman as the best thing she can afford in a union context. This probably means that you've been qualified as that contract beta male. And this means that if a woman doesn't have strong moral standards, she may turn on that longing for a stronger male she once had. If you notice it, it could be a predictor of impending trouble, and if, in the wrong sense, divorced or lonely girlfriends interfere with it with their golden advice, then the potential for drama radically increases. You have two choices. Either increase your SMV so that it becomes her best choice available, which in turn will trigger desire and may save the relationship, or expect a change in her behavior, cooling, distancing, which unfortunately may just mark the beginning of the end. Of course, there are other factors to be taken into account, and you will take them into consideration, consciously or unconsciously, when you make a decision on a possible separation. However, I would remind you that the majority of divorce claims in Poland are filed by women. It's not a coincidence. It's the result of letting women's reproductive strategies go into self-control. From other episodes, you already know that in the vast majority of cases, subconscious mechanisms decide, and logic has very little to say if the primary structures of the brain decide otherwise, and the person is not aware of it. When you know and understand the hypergamal nature of women, think about why men once wanted to take a virgin from their wives. Do you think it was just their fancy? Or did it make a deeper sense? Why was a virgin once sacrificed to the gods? Why were virgins so precious? That it was decided to sacrifice one of the most precious resources for each community to do the favor of the gods. It wasn't a coincidence. The vast majority of studies devoted to temporary sexual contact from the English hookup culture clearly show that a large number of them are harmful and have serious long-term consequences. True, they are detrimental to both women, and which may be a surprise to some men, but the level of this harm is greater for women because they are more emotional. They result, for example, in the phenomenon of alpha widows and problems with entering and dining honest, and supportive, long-term relationships, undermining self-esteem, creating unfavorable patterns of behavior, etc. From the point of view of the benefits and costs, a dozen seconds of peeking is definitely not worth the cost, while pleasure occurs immediately, and the costs are shifted in time, which is why it is so easy to catch this hook of unconscious people, especially women. The gentlemen have a little easier in this respect, because for us, coupling does not always involve such a strong emotional investment as for women. We just have different reproductive strategies. But hookup culture is a topic for a different episode, so today I will not be developing this topic anymore. If you like this movie, leave me a like and a subscription. Thank you.